Ever since I was a kid, the older men in my family treated fishing like a sacred tradition. Every weekend, rain or shine, someone was loading up the boat before sunrise. Being the youngest, I was next in line to carry the torch, as my dad always put it. The two who took it most seriously were my dad, David, and his brother, Ryan. Our houses looked like small fishing museums. Rods, reels, tackle, photos of trophy catches on every wall. If you stepped inside, you'd know right away my parents spent more time on the water than on land. But this story isn't mine. It's my dad's. And to this day, it's one he hates telling. Whenever he does, usually after a few drinks at a family gathering, his voice changes. He gets quiet, detached, like he's back there again. It happened about 15 years ago way on Blackwater Cove, a secluded inlet off Lake Superior that few people even know exists. My dad, his brother Ryan, and three close friends, Rick, Jake, and Marty, set out before dawn. The plan was simple: fish all day, camp overnight, and head back in the morning. They reached the cove after a couple hours of steady boating, mist curling off the water like smoke. Surrounded by dense pine forest, the spot was a hidden gem, prime for bass and the occasional northern pike. Marty was the first to crack open a beer, at 7 in the morning, no less. My dad always said Marty was that friend, fun, loud, and usually halfway drunk before noon. The day went smoothly at first. They fished, they joked, they celebrated every good catch. But as the sun started to set, a heavy fog rolled in. My dad described it as like the lake was swallowing us. You couldn't see more than 10 feet in any direction. Even Rick, the most experienced of them, admitted he'd never seen fog like that. It felt wrong, too thick, too sudden. Jake and Marty were too buzzed to care, but my dad and Rick were getting uneasy. They decided Ryan should try steering the boat out toward open water, hoping the fog would thin out. But visibility was near zero. Within minutes, Ryan almost ran them into the rocky shoreline. He decided it wasn't worth the risk. They'd stay put until morning. That's when they realized there was no cell signal. My dad needed to check in with work, so he offered to hike inland with Rick and Jake to find reception. Ryan stayed with the boat and the nearly passed out Marty. Before leaving, my dad grabbed a couple of emergency flares, just in case. The three of them waded ashore, flashlights cutting through the fog. The forest was silent, unnervingly so. They decided to head uphill, figuring higher ground might give them a signal. Then they heard it, a clicking sound. At first faint, like someone snapping twigs rhythmically, but soon surrounding them. Clicks and taps echoing from all directions. It didn't sound like animals. It was too deliberate. Rick whispered for them to turn off their lights. "Don't move," he said. As soon as the beams went out, the forest seemed to breathe. The fog thickened. The clicking stopped. Then silence. My dad said that moment felt like it lasted forever. None of them dared to speak. They were just standing there in the dark, barely breathing. And then came the scream. Raw. Human. Agonized. Before they could react, someone came charging through the woods. Heavy footsteps, breaking branches, getting closer. Rick shouted, "Run," and they bolted back toward the boat. My dad fired a flare behind them, hoping to scare off whatever was chasing them. For a split second, the woods lit up in a red glow. And that's when they saw them. Figures, at least a dozen, standing among the trees. Pale faces painted with black streaks, animal bones tied around their necks. Some held wooden spears. The flare burned out and darkness swallowed them again. Jake tripped, but Rick grabbed him, dragging him the rest of the way until they broke through the tree line. They were screaming before they even hit the dock. "Start the engine! Go, go!" Ryan didn't ask questions. He gunned the motor just as the figures reached the shoreline. My dad fired another flare, this one high into the air, and for a brief instant they could see the people again. 15, maybe 20 of them, standing perfectly still at the water's edge, watching. When the flare dimmed, they were gone. They didn't speak for nearly an hour, just sat there, drifting, listening to their own breathing. When morning came, the fog was gone. So were any traces of footprints on the beach. They left immediately. Marty, who'd passed out drunk early that night, didn't believe a word of it, said they must have been hallucinating. But every time my dad tells that story, he swears he's never been more certain of what he saw. He hasn't fished at Blackwater Cove since, and honestly, after hearing that story growing up, I don't think I ever will either. A couple of years back, I joined my brother-in-law, Eric, on a fishing trip with my sister, Laura, and a few of his friends. Eric came from money, old money, and ever since my sister married him, she's been living in luxury right alongside him. They had this huge two-story house on Bayfield Point, right on the water. His private dock led straight out to a massive white boat he'd named the Lila, after my sister. I remember him bragging that he got the idea from Forrest Gump. I packed a small backpack for the overnight trip and drove out early that morning. Eric had stocked the boat with enough food for a week: burgers, steaks, chips, beer, and because, of course, there was a full stainless steel grill bolted to the deck. We set off around sunrise. A few hours in, the excitement had worn off. The only person who'd caught anything was Eric, a single largemouth bass, and everyone else was already halfway drunk. I was 18 at the time, and Laura kept scolding me every time I reached for a drink. She's always been the overprotective type. Honestly, I was starting to regret even coming. The only enjoyable part was lying out on the deck, tanning under the clear blue sky, listening to the soft hum of the engine. As the day dragged on, the sun started to dip low, painting the sky a deep orange. Eric fired up the grill and tossed on a pile of burgers. It struck me as funny. We'd spent all day fishing and we were eating hamburgers instead, but I wasn't complaining. By the time we finished eating, night had completely settled in. There's something strange about being out on the open ocean after dark. No land in sight, no lights on the horizon, just endless black water stretching in every direction. It's beautiful and terrifying. Everyone was completely hammered now. Eric, his friends Derek and Sean, and even Laura, though she was holding it together better than the rest. I eventually gave in and grabbed a beer off the counter. One turned into two, and two turned into three. I finally started to relax and laugh along with them. Then, over the music, I heard something. Faint voices, coming from outside. I turned the volume down, and everyone froze. It was unmistakable. Two men shouting for help somewhere out on the water. I ran out to the deck and leaned over the railing. In the dim light, I could make out a small, beat-up fishing boat drifting nearby. Two men were in it, waving their arms and calling out. They looked exhausted. "We ran out of gas," one of them yelled. "Please, we need food and fuel." Eric stumbled over, slurring his words, and told them to hang tight while he got the ladder. He tripped on the way, nearly dropping his beer. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right with me. The men weren't injured, and their boat wasn't sinking, but everyone else was too drunk to care. Eric and I lowered the ladder, and the two men climbed aboard. They were both middle-aged, maybe in their 40s, speaking in heavy accents I couldn't place. I apologized for everyone being so wasted, but they just stared past me, fixated on Eric. He handed them the leftover burgers from dinner, and they devoured them in seconds. Then he grabbed a spare jerry can of gas from the storage bin and passed it to them. They thanked us quietly and climbed back down. For a moment I felt better, like maybe I'd done the right thing. Everyone crashed not long after that. Eric and Laura took the cabin, and the rest of us made do with the pull-out couch and deck chairs. I tossed and turned for an hour before finally giving up and going outside to use the bathroom. Eric had told us to just pee overboard to save water. I stepped onto the deck. The night was dead silent, or at least it should have been. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the low hum of a motor. I froze, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. The darkness made it impossible to tell. I climbed up to the helm and switched on the searchlight, sweeping it slowly across the water. Nothing. Turned the light another 90 degrees. Still nothing. Then, as the beam swung around behind us, I saw it. That same little boat drifting toward us again. Before I could even shout, a scream tore through the cabin below. I jumped down and ran inside. One of Eric's friends, Derek, was standing in the corner, shaking. The other, Sean, sat upright on the couch, his eyes wide. I saw them," Derek stammered. "They were inside, two of them, standing right over me." Eric and Laura burst out of their room, half-dressed, panicked. We all rushed to the deck, but the men were gone. The smaller boat was still floating nearby when I'd first seen it, but now, under the searchlight, the water was empty. We searched the boat from end to end. Nothing was missing, except for a few cans of gasoline and Eric's wallet and keys, which had been sitting out on the kitchen counter. Nobody said a word. Eric started the engine, and we left right then and there. It took nearly 4 hours to make it back to shore. None of us slept. The next morning, Eric had the locks changed and ordered a new set of security cameras. 3 weeks later, those same cameras caught two hooded men walking up to the front door around 2 a.m. They tried the handle, fiddled with the lock for a few seconds, then bolted when the porch light came on. We never saw them again, but we all know it was them. My name's Dylan, and fishing has always been my escape. Any chance I get, I'm out on the water. Lake, river, bayou, doesn't matter. This happened about 3 months ago, just outside of Pascagoula, Mississippi, when I went marsh fishing with my buddy Eric, who's every bit as addicted to fishing as I am. And we'd gone out plenty of times before, usually chasing redfish or speckled trout. That day, we took my two-person kayak, like always. It was early spring, still cold enough that the air bit at your hands, and the water looked like liquid ice. We didn't care. We were just glad to be out there. After paddling for about half an hour, we found a quiet pocket of water surrounded by tall reeds. No boats, no voices, just the hum of the wind. We cracked open a couple of beers and settled in, soaking up the calm. About an hour in, Eric hooked something big. You could tell by the bend in his rod and the grin on his face. But he leaned too far over the side trying to get a better angle. And before I could even warn him, his phone slipped right out of his hoodie pocket and plopped into the murky water. He cursed up a storm, said insurance would cover water damage, but not if it was gone for good. And honestly, I couldn't blame him for being upset. Replacing that thing would cost a few $100s, easy. We tried using our paddles to feel around in the mud for about 20 minutes, but it was useless. The marsh bottom was all thick sludge and tangled roots. Even though we both saw exactly where it fell, the more we searched, the less sure we were. I finally told him to let it go, but Eric shook his head. He said he wasn't leaving without it. Before I could talk him out of it, he kicked off his shoes, rolled up his pants, and said he'd wade in to feel around with his feet. The second he stepped in, he yelled about how cold it was. The water came up almost to his chest. It was deeper than I thought, but he started moving slowly, feeling along the bottom. I sat there in the kayak, watching him shiver and curse while my patience started to wear thin. I was about to tell him to give it up when it happened. 1 second he was standing there, and the next, he was gone. His whole body just jerked forward and vanished under the surface. I thought maybe he'd slipped or dove under on purpose, but after 5-6 seconds passed and he didn't come back up, panic hit me hard. I kicked off my shoes and was about to jump in when he exploded out of the water, covered head to toe in mud, screaming at me to get out of there right now. I grabbed his arm and yanked him back onto the kayak, and we started paddling like hell. Eric was shaking uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from something else. He kept looking behind us, like he expected something to rise up from the water. When we were finally far enough away, I asked him what the hell had just happened. He said something had grabbed his ankle and pulled him under. He couldn't explain what it felt like. It wasn't a hand or an animal bite. He said it felt like something smooth and alive had wrapped around him and tried to drag him away from where we'd been fishing. He said he fought it, kicked as hard as he could, and finally broke free. We went straight back to the launch after that. Neither of us said much. I kept trying to tell him maybe it was a big catfish or a gar, but Eric swore it wasn't any fish he'd ever felt before. That's what's been messing with me ever since. I've been fishing those marshes for years, and I've never seen or even heard of anything like that. I looked online for reports of weird creatures or strange drownings, but nothing matched what he described. I'll be honest, part of me wants to go back and see for myself, but every time I think about that spot, something in my gut tells me not to. Now, whenever I go out marsh fishing, I can't shake the feeling that something's still down there, waiting just beneath the surface.